It's good to
Good
see you.
morning, Pastor Jason.
Professor Rabbi Joseph. Uh,
Oh,
you, you have sent me an article. Um, where did you first see this?
um, yeah, are we talking about the op-ed from the New York Times
Oh, okay.
about the writers?
Yes, a chill has fallen over Jews in publishing. So, talk to us about this article.
It it is a another take on a topic we have already discussed tragically several times since October 7th, and that is how the war since October 8th has increasingly stigmatized, marginalized, and fed the hatred that people now have for Zionists, Jews. We aren't surprised that there is hatred of Jews. We've been dealing with that, but there is a new intensity framed by the issue of Zionism and the ideological construct that Zionism feeds today genocide. Look, I have said from the first week of this war, the prosecution of the Israeli government is not just tragic, not just mistake ridden, but is fueled by the humiliation of October 7th. It is tragically, at a human level, an act of revenge. This article now says Jewish authors, Jewish writers in America are being delegitimized by the issue of whether or not they can also be labeled, tagged as Zionists.
Mm-hmm.
A couple weeks ago, I made the mistake of turning on CNN and watching the Congress once again uh, ask presidents of universities to testify. And Representative Elise Stefanik once again did her McCarthy impression, listening to her grill, torment the president of Northwestern, who is himself a Jew, under and behind the guise of protecting Jews who are the objects of anti Semitism. The right and the left are now engaged in the cottage industries of anti Semitism, the politicized and weaponized cottage industries. This op ed raises the question of, are Jews being boycotted? Are Jews being economically excluded, tagged in such a way that even the august PEN America will cancel an annual event because it does not want to do anything that is misunderstood as not fully representing the Palestinian writers. So this op-ed represents another zeitgeist moment. We are.
It begins with an account, a Twitter handle that posted a link. So someone on Twitter posted a color-coded spreadsheet classifying nearly 200 writers according to their views on the genocide in Gaza. Titled, "Is Your Favorite Author a Zionist?" It reads like a cross between Tiger Beat and the Protocols of the Elders of Zion. And someone who is marked out as being overly Zionist and pro-Israel is Emily St. John Mandel, the author of Station 11, one of my favorite books.
Look, um, we are a country, a society uh, driven uh, consciously, intentionally to either ors.
Hmm.
And unless people begin with an equal intentionality to say, stop, I won't participate in any more either ors. We must look for the complex, ambiguous in between. I am a Zionist. I support the dignity and destiny of the Palestinian people. I am unconditionally supportive of the survival of the Jewish people. I condemn the Israeli government. Nothing either or about my identity. I'm a Jewish author, but I suppose because I'm a rabbi, there's little doubt about where I am. No, that's not true. There are anti Zionist rabbis too. Maybe my titles will confuse where I fit on that spreadsheet. But do we today want to add to the anger and divisive level of being an anti-community? That's what this op-ed, it's why I sent it to you. It is another example of the anti-communitarian values of both extremes. Your movement has gone through this. Your own way of knowing yourself as a Christian. Why are we doing this to each other?
It strikes me. It strikes me too that the black and white either or tendency um, is that's unsustainable given how unreliable the first brushes of these news stories are coming out of the war.
Right. Look, Netanyahu and his ultra right government are not going to be bullied out of the way they want Hamas dismantled. They're simply not. Should I take the risk of saying he knows the end is near and he won't end the war in order to be pushed out? Okay, whatever it is, he's been told, don't go into Rafah. How did that work? The Jewish community is bitter and infuriated with the way this government misrepresents being a Jew, Zionism. But here we are. We don't look at people, their skin, their identity, and say they represent everyone of that tag. This op-ed raises the question, and it's a tragic question in 2024. Should Jewish authors, because they are Jewish, not necessarily even writing about Jewish topics, should they be required to prove they aren't Zionists, they aren't in favor of genocide? I would have hoped that of all the communities that understand ambiguity, writers would not have taken this step. And so, those of us committed to dialogue, those of us committed to wait, it's much more complex. Let's ask, what do you mean? And I demand that those tagging Zionists now explain Do they mean to deny Jews an element of their identity? How are we as a collective to accept the diversities that are required of us in the 21st century? So I don't know how to handle what seems now to become another industry, a craft, an intellectual arena, which once again has become a part of the left. How do I retrieve the open, complex, and ambiguous in which I believe human beings are their best, instead of the narrow and tightly construed?
So this article says, one of the greatest mass delusions of the 21st century is the belief that Israel is committing a genocide against Palestinians. This grotesque moral inversion, in which a genocidal terrorist organization that instigated a war with Israel by committing the largest massacre of Jews since the Holocaust, is absolved of responsibility, while the victim of Hamas's attack is charged with perpetrating the worst crime known to man. This began taking shape before Israel even launched its ground invasion of Gaza. A charitable description of those imputing genocidal motivations to Israel is that they are ignorant, essentially believing the word to mean large numbers of civilian casualties. For others, accusing Israel of genocide is an emotional outlet for expressing outrage at such a horrific loss of life. A third, more pessimistic characterization of the ubiquitous genocide canard is that it is only the latest iteration of the ancient anti-Semitic blood libel, which held that Jews murdered Gentile children in order to use their blood for religious rituals.
Henry Ford bought the Dearborn Independent in order to publish the Protocols of the Elders of Zion. How does one teach American history and overlook that the single man, the single industrial giant, Henry Ford, also brought the Protocols of the Elders of Zion into the normative press of America and its culture?
So,
Look,
so talk about the protocols for people who don't know.
Protocols of the Elders of Zion is a mock-up, probably produced in Russia, an attempt to create the framing of Jews' control. Then control what? Everything, anything? We all meet collectively, and our job collectively is to undermine the stability of the world. And this anti-Semitic conspiracy, I found copies of it in a hotel gift shop in Amman, Jordan, when I was on a trip with rabbis. And I went on the bus and said, do we all go in and buy 3 in order to get rid of them? But will that produce more sales? It's like teaching Protestants Luther's last 4 sermons. It's there in the library, but you don't know what it says. Protocols of the Elders of Zion continues to be translated and produced today. There was a novella made in Egypt of it, a serial drama in their Netflix. The idea that Jews have the power, and being a Zionist obviously is about power, and the cruelty of how that power is expressed, colonialism, settler, exclusion. I don't deny the pain inside the Palestinian narrative, but it then attracts a need for an explanation. And the explanation is the Jews have always been in control. And when not in control, they collectively, conspiratorially seek control. The idea that language can be so misused by writers. The op-ed says, how ironic that a collective craft can now mismarket among themselves those who are Zionist, ergo automatically genocidal, and always understood to be racist. The Protocols of the Elders of Zion is the fundamental text that has in Europe and America and now globally proved this is inherent in our purpose. Why do I defend myself? When I taught at St. Cloud State, there were always various Christian groups in the student union passing out free Christian scriptures, asking if I had allowed God to fill my heart with the love of Jesus. They all know who I was. And I often spent time expressing, could you please offer what you have to someone who has nothing? Why must I defend that what I have is sufficient? I am loved by God. I know that every single day. I serve because of that love. I engage in the unbroken nature of my covenant with God. Thank you. I don't need what you're giving me. Being a Zionist is not a statement of hatred and exclusion about others who share the land. It is a statement about me. I am a people, a community. And yes, since the beginning of the 20th century, there has been a physicality to that. And it has emerged. This war began on October 7th. It is a war that some Muslims, some Palestinians, some Arabs don't want to end until Israel is destroyed and all Jews are removed. Yeah. Some translate their own reading of the Quran as this is a holy land that can only be populated by those who follow the prophet. That is an extreme reading. I'm looking for somewhere to share. And those who seek to support the dignity and destiny of the Palestinian people should give me, just one Jew, a chance to participate in that support. But this op-ed suggests, as a Zionist, I am automatically excluded. I've experienced that in anti-racism groups. I'm white, I'm privileged, sit in the back and don't participate.
Yeah, so this op-ed is written by James Kirchick, who writes for Tablet and Airmail and is the author of Secret City, The Hidden History of Gay Washington. Um, he, he mentions here in the article, and I think it's worth you commenting on. Um, and this would not be the only instance of this kind of infecting our discourse, but he mentions how the pejorative connotation of Zionist aligns with how Russian propaganda has spoken of Israel for a while now, and now it's infecting um, American uh, language as well.
It is tragic, and I don't know another word um, that our language, our unique, maybe even divine human quality of choosing words. Animals communicate. We do more than merely communicate. We think, we create through language. The Soviets always understood that the manipulation of language, already taken from what Goebbels perfected, if you can make people believe simply in the way they talk, you can already change behavior. Jews were vermin, so they could be exterminated because we exterminate rats. Push beyond assimilated, push beyond expelled. 1975, the UN voted that Zionism is racism. This has been a tension with which we've lived. The Soviets, the Russians even now, continue to have a goal of being disruptive. It was a term that we liked in economics a couple of decades ago. But now disruptive means to be able to control through chaos.
Mm-hmm.
So the fact that writers, those who know language at the deepest and most beautiful level, writers have decided to take an idiom in its most extreme use. So, as a Zionist, is that a new star for me to wear? Do you need to know the way some people want to know someone's sexual orientation? The way someone wants to know, are you going to support an election if you lose it? We are pushing each other to live on the fringes. And the word Zionist is one of today's best implements of knowing. Because if you are a Zionist, that means you are for genocide.
Yeah.
No, wait, no. We are going to lose our ability to have nuance. We are going to assume, based on and you'll notice, fact. This is a fact, not a fiction. Israel is genocidal. If you are a Zionist, you support Israel, therefore you are genocidal.
Yeah. So the article goes on. It says the real objectives behind the cynical weaponization of the word genocide and the authoritarian insistence that anyone who disagrees with it is an enabler of one are to shut down debate, defame dissenters, and impose a rigid orthodoxy throughout the publishing world. He's talking about a controversy around the PEN Awards. It is a naked attempt to impose an ideological litmus test on anyone hoping to join the Republic of Letters, a litmus test that the vast majority of Jews would fail. I'm wondering, Joseph, because you mentioned being sidelined in anti-racism discussions. what is the overarching dilemma? Is it anti-Semitism or is it illiberalism?
Wonderful question. Wonderful, wonderful question. I thought at one point, maybe 60 years ago, when I was at Cal and watched Mario Savio stand on the roof of a car, I thought that was being a liberal. I thought that was being a prophetic participant in society, what I watched Heschel do in Marching with Dr. King. I was sure that my opposition to the war in Vietnam was a part of what Heschel wanted us to understand a prophet does. It was biblical. It's why I would finally understand I wanted to be a rabbi. That liberalism is no longer available to me. That liberalism has been misplaced, in my opinion, by a progressivism that is so far to the left and insistent, militant. This is our glossary. Please check off what you're in and what you're out.
And where does that transit? When did that change happen?
Well, I taught at St. Cloud State from 2002 until 2016. And my battle with the anti-racist on campus was almost immediate. And so I experienced, long before there was DEI, before George Floyd, I experienced, if you're white, you begin outside the conversation of anti-racism. You can't be in, because as a white privileged man, here are the things you've already committed. No, wait, that's not my life. No, it's the way we have chosen to describe the categories, the tags. The fact that I had created a orphanage in India for children whose parents had all died of AIDS, children from rural areas where none of these children were on a grid in India. There were no birth certificates, and these were all children of color, poor, dying children. Nope, I'm sorry. You're white, you're privileged, and on top of it, you're a Jew. So, somewhere over the past 15 to 20 years, what I understood to be prophetic religious liberalism has become a rigid progressive leftist movement, and much of it determined by the issues of race, issues of gender. And because I'm male and white, I'm excluded. After a while, I got tired of attempting to fight that. And I just accepted the tags of my reality. Now, today, that is DEI. Today, the issues of Black Lives Matter has incorporated itself into Students for a Free Palestine. Those are people of color. Those are oppressed people. They are people who have been the object of colonialism and racism. So there's an assumed conversation of understanding that already is so presumed that I'm excluded by the time I get to, can I come in? Can I participate? No. I'm not surprised that the far left excludes me today. I am deeply saddened that that exclusion feeds a hatred. I won't use the word anti-Semitism. It is a hatred fed by a certainty If you're a Zionist, ergo you support Israel, ergo you support genocide. I don't understand that intellectual. How does that work? So I didn't understand when I experienced this at St. Cloud State, Jason, that it would become the norm. While simultaneously, Elise Stefanik and the far right and the Christian nationalists and the John Hagees continue on the far right.
Mm-hmm.
So what has happened from October 8th on is it's like a vice. We are squeezed in between. But this in between is not a between where you can have a conversation. You are, as you said at the outset, I'm afraid. I'm not just afraid for myself. I'm afraid for the Jews being described in this op-ed. What does it mean for a Jew who has chosen to be an author? And understand that the career they have chosen now has an overarching politicized. How shocking. After Solomon Rushdie is attacked based on a fatwa from a far-right Muslim that we're going to invert this, no longer a fatwa, but a progressive statement of shame. You're a Zionist.
So
I would have hoped. Go on.
I just, I say a little bit, make it explicit, this irony that imposing a uniformity of thought upon a guild of people whose vocation it is to speak freely their views and minds.
The Merchant of Venice is sometimes considered an element of Shakespeare that should no longer be performed because of how the Jew is represented regarding money lending, pound of flesh. But it was a historical reality that because Jews could not own land, because Jews could not and would not be permitted to be part of all other guilds, this was what was left for them, and the church needed them. So they became moneylenders. Jewish history is about our ability to adapt.
Mm-hmm.
We found ourselves increasingly comfortable and free in the areas of the intellectual world. And so that's where we found meaning. We shared what gifts we had individually and as a community. So Jews became thinkers, writing, creating. Will Jews once again be blackballed as they were during the UAC hearings? You know how many Jewish writers were thrown out of Hollywood? So Jews are also Zionists. Jews must at some point decide, what is my relationship with the modern state of Israel, the Jewish people? This new litmus test denies Jews the diversity. We might support the people, but abhor the government.
Mm-hmm.
what occurred in Rafah is beyond acceptable. This government should not stand. I don't support a government that destroys civilian life. Am I genocidal because I support the unconditional survival of the Jewish people? Not according to some on the far left. And this op ed describes what has now become, if you're a Zionist, oh, you're also a Jew. We are a 15.8 million in a global population of 8.2 billion. 8.2 billion. So, reading this, how many Jews can be excluded? At a quantified level, this op ed is not describing a large community, but it's another description of why Jews are afraid of being Jews today.
And in reading it, I was thinking there's a lot of attention on the left and in the mainstream media about the dangers posed to democracy at this moment. Like the coming election is framed in terms of democracy being at stake, which I don't necessarily disagree with. But the threats to democracy are bigger than nativism or authoritarianism. It's also under threat by this insistence on uniformity of thought and speech. That democracy has no meaning if people aren't free to dissent.
If the righteous demand that all of us understand genocide the same way, then genocide means nothing. Then the righteous indignation about the destruction of any people means nothing. I don't disagree with the anger that this war has produced. I don't disagree with that. But to use that anger to then demonize all Jews, all Israelis, all Jews who support the nature of a state called Israel. Life is simply more complex.
Well, I mean, I don't want to portray ourselves in any sort of heroic terms, but it's telling to me that I've had a number of colleagues say to me privately that they were grateful for our conversations, but they would be reluctant to publicly say that.
And I've been told that my honesty with you has now put me on the wrong side of others who might have previously engaged me in dialogue. Okay, we understand. We have found each other. We have taken the risks necessary to develop a place we can talk, learn, listen, talk, reflect. Are we making an impact? However many people listen, will they then also talk to a Jew and say, I don't understand when you tell me you're a Zionist. What do you mean?
It's I think people rightly try to understand the outlook and emotions that the Palestinian situation produces in them. I mean, you mentioned it a few minutes ago. I don't know that we take the time to likewise think about how formative it is for Israel to be a tiny nation surrounded by people who wish them not to exist, and just the idea that your average American can even get into that mindset is foolish.
Correct. And to be a professional writer, to decide that you will take the monetary professional risks to craft a book and then attempt to live by what you have crafted. We're talking about a tiny community of human beings. And now someone has determined to put a template on top of that tiny community and say, nope, nope, you are no longer acceptable.
Well, I mean, and part of that's what's his name? James Davidson Hunter, a sociologist at UVA, wrote a book called "To Change the World," and one of the assertions in the book I remember is you know he undoes the myth that Christianity changed the world by being a movement of the poor, and he's like, no, like it's they converted people who shaped the culture at the top, and it filtered down, and yeah, so it's a tiny community of people, but um, you impose limitations on people who shape culture, and you are determining culture.
I I think it's an op-ed. It's a moment of looking at how we're treating each other in the language some are using. If I had a bookstore, I would take everyone on that list and put their books in the window. Here is where you can buy books written by Zionists. This is the same group, by the way, that fights the banning of books.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, yeah, it's yeah.
So, as we move beyond now a trial, maybe we should all read the Scarlet Letter. Maybe that's what we should make Trump wear, a scarlet letter. Wherever he goes, no matter what he does, he must wear a letter that says, 12 peers have found you to have done this. I wonder whether that would be socially acceptable.
We've mentioned this before, but it's hard to hold intention. On the one hand, nothing is serious, um, so so like nothing is serious, and yet um, we're absolutely serious to the point of imposing litmus tests on other things.
Okay. And the more litmus tests based on the most serious categories of human behavior, issues of what one's skin pigment tells us, what one's private sexual orientation, whatever those categories are.
I
Yes,
get,
we have a moral responsibility to live together.
yeah, and maybe the overlap is the way in which we want to impute righteousness or unrighteousness to people's political choices, and like when it comes to like Donald Trump, maybe that's another maybe. So maybe there is an overlap when like we don't want to try to understand the motivations of people who might vote differently than us.
Correct. or I am so shocked that people are so different, I've given up the attempt to try and understand the difference.
Yeah.
But here we are, and we must continue day by day. What is it that I need to understand?
I spoke yesterday with he's a rising third year student at Duke Divinity School, and he did time for drug trafficking. He's a student pastor, was appointed to a church in rural North Carolina. And I asked him how they received someone with his background. And he said, well, actually, the person in charge of the staff parish committee, before he got there, they called him and they wanted a picture of him because he was a member of a Black church in Charlotte. And so this little rural church, they weren't concerned that he was a drug addict, ex-con. They were more concerned that he might be Black. And, and he's like, it was like a super Trumpy area of the country and unvaccinated and racist. And, but then he was able to, like, all that's true. And yet some of these people are wonderful people that were a blessing to him. And to be able to hold that complexity all at once, I was like, well, you're going to be a good pastor.
And that story is at the very essence of what our challenge is today. They need to know if he's white.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Okay. Okay. So is it that people are worried I commit genocide, that I'm a Zionist, or I don't believe in the dominant way God is described? Being hated is not new in my experience as a human being. But this is new as the way I have to defend myself.
Yeah.
And as a soon-to-be 78-year-old retired rabbi professor living in Rio, trying to defend myself from the genocide going on in Rafah, how do I get there?
Well, Joseph, it's good to talk to you again.
Good to talk to you. We'll see each other next week. Congratulations on a